Welcome back to the 2023 verdict. It's a photo education segment now, so where we'll talk about the polling units, overvoting, and some of the matters that you really have to take cognizance of as you get yourself ready to go and perform your civic responsibility to vote. And as you've seen there, Samson Otodo joins us next. He is the Executive Director for YAGA. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
A very good morning to you. And great studio you have here, I must say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, speaking about this big election day that we're all counting down to, the polling units, of course, it is very crucial. Overvoting could also arise from those areas which vigilance is of essence. So we'll go through some of those concerns here now, but the Electoral Act clearly talks about conduct at polling units, where if you just go ahead and take a look at Section 58 right away, one says the presiding officer shall regulate the admission of voters to the polling unit and shall exclude all persons other than the candidates, polling agents, poll clerks, and persons lawfully entitled to be admitted, including accredited observers, and the presiding officer shall keep order and comply with the requirement of this act at the polling unit. 2, the presiding officer may order a person to be removed from a polling unit who behaves in a disorderly manner or fails to obey a lawful order. These are some of the provisions we take for granted sometimes when you get to the polling unit, where they tell you, please calm down, please move this way. Then you raise your voice and think it's business as usual. I still people were, bus stops, but now you've seen they could ask you to step aside. But Samson, this is usually very dicey because, when you have such a huge crowd, polling officers are usually very cautious how to actually operationalize this clause.
Yeah, they have sometimes an issue with managing elections at the polling unit, because the election is a human activity. It involves managing human beings, and sometimes these persons who show up at the polling units come there with different mindset and orientation. Some of them are probably emotional and sentimental about voting. Some of them are angry. Some of them are impatient. But they are very cooperative voters. But there's a reason why the law gives the presiding officer the power, to determine who makes it into the polling unit, because not everyone is expected within the precincts of the polling unit. And it is clearly stated those who are and should be at the polling units, like voters, because the election is about the voters, so they have to be at the polling unit. There are also election officials, there are election observers and duly accredited persons. So yes, the presiding officer does have the power. But what then is a polling unit? Because it's important that we unpack it. And a polling unit is simply, the location where, as a voter, you are required to show up to either register to vote or vote. But in this particular case, it is the location where you cast your vote. And every voter is assigned to a particular polling unit. And INEC has described, and the law clearly says, what locations can be used as polling units. And they must be public buildings. So things like religious centers, traditional centers, cannot be used as polling units.
They're not public enough.
No, they are not. They are not public because elections are a civil activity and endeavor. So there's the principles of neutrality are critical when it comes to elections, because you don't want elections ascribed to a particular religion or to a particular tribe, because in its case we're a secular state, and as a secular state, it is important that public institutions are used as locations for polling units. So those are the polling units. And then INEC has said there are 176,846 polling units. Now, this figure wasn't the figure that was used in the 2019 elections. There were about 119,000 polling units in 2019, but additional polling units were created by INEC. And there's a reason why these additional polling units were created. First, there are polling units one that were congested. So you go to polling stations or polling units on election day, you discover that there are over 10,000 people who are registered to vote in a particular polling unit. And the total number of hours that that Nigeria has or has allotted or assigned for voting is from 8:30 to 2:30 p.m. 8:30 to 2:30 p.m. is somewhere, it's about 6 or 5 hours thereabout. And it's insufficient to have 10,000 people, vote within that amount of time. And so INEC decongested the polling units because it wanted to expand access for citizens to access those polling units. There were also cases where polling units were quite located at, locations that are distant from the residence of people. So that was also another reason why INEC created, additional polling units. But also, before after the 2019 elections, there were voting points that were created by INEC. There were also voting point settlements. All of these settlements and voting points, there were sub-voting points under polling units. And when it comes to the collation and tabulation of results, there was often confusion. And now those voting point settlements and voting points have now been converted into polling units. That's why you have this number of polling units, and we expect that it will increase, the turnout of voters for elections. But INEC, migrated people from polling units to polling units, and this is the whole essence of today's conversation, because there is need to go and locate and confirm your polling unit before election day, because some people have been moved from one polling unit to another. And the rationale behind the movement is to make the voting process seamless for you so you can easily access the polling unit, because the threshold for each polling unit is 750 per polling unit. And so places where you have more than that number, they have moved and migrated people to polling units that are within the same location. So we expect that it wouldn't be distant. But there are three reasons why it's important that every voter out there should confirm and locate their polling unit on election day. The first reason is you need to identify the polling unit where your name is on the register for that polling unit to vote.
So that means they should have checked their name on the register first.
Yes. So INEC has said they would publish, the voters register for all the 176,846 polling units. That's what INEC has said. But before the publication, voters should go and locate and confirm their polling unit. Because if you show up at a wrong polling unit on election day, your name will not be on the voters register, your name will not be on the BVAS for that particular polling unit. This is why it is important that voters should locate and confirm their polling unit.
So what if a voter goes to a polling unit that his name is not, and his name happens to be on another polling unit? So does it mean that he has to show up at the right one? Because if you show up at the wrong one, will there be, how easy or difficult will it be for you to move to another one? Because chances are you may not even know where that one would be, would it?
Well, if you look at the information that has come from INEC, what they have said is the migration is within the same location. So, for instance, where you had voting points, and what was a voting point? So if you come to, let's say this is polling unit X, and there's a polling unit X here with 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 voters. Usually, in 2019, they will create sub or what you call baby polling units.
Same access.
Same, within the same location, but it will just be a separate voting point. So sometimes when you approach a polling unit, you discover there are 3 or 4 voting points. Now, what INEC has done is those voting points have now been converted to polling units. So if you are moved, it will be within the same location, and that's the general principle, and that's what we expect. So if you show up in, say, polling unit X, and your name is not on the register, the probability that your name is on the register for the polling unit closest to that polling unit is quite high. And this is the reason why voters need to go and confirm their polling unit to avoid confusion and chaos on election day. Because you would see situations where a voter would show up, they will stand on the queue, and then they probably wait for 30 to 1 hour, and then when they approach, only to find out they're not supposed to be there. So this is important to avoid confusion on election day. The third reason why this is important is to vote early. If you verify or confirm your polling unit before election day, you show up early, the chances that you would vote early will be high. So this is why it is important for voters to verify and locate their polling units before election day. And we can talk about what are the ways you can verify or locate your polling unit before election day.
Well, we'll talk about that in a bit. But, you know, there was some confusion when INEC itself, you know, announced that a number of polling units, I think over 200 of them, there will be no election or there will be no voting at those polling units on election day. And there was some question, the people did not quite understand how come it was that, you know, no elections are going to take place in those polling units. Can you help shed some light on it?
So, again, this is where INEC needs to provide further explanation. And I think that the statement attributed to the chairman when the parties met was quite, provided some information, but more information needs to be provided. So when the decongestion, when new polling units were created, it resulted to 3 different types of polling units. The first one was you had oversized polling units. So oversized means polling units that had over 750, right? You now had polling units that had only 1 registered voter, because these polling units were located in several communities, and want to believe, based on what INEC said, that communities were consulted in this, but there were also relocation of polling units from the homes of politicians, from even shrines, as well as traditional institutions. But then you now had 0 polling units. And I think what INEC is saying is these 0 polling units were created because, you know, voters, or we have this 0 polling unit because voters didn't choose, you know, those polling units. This is why, you know, you have situations where those polling units do not have registered voters, because during voter registration, voters are asked the question, where is your address, where is your location? And then the registration official will look for the polling units around that area and then assign you to those polling units. So what INEC is saying is that for these polling units, nobody selected those polling units. That's why you have 0 polling units, and there are 240 of them, which I also think that, yes, is a level of transparency to publish those 240 polling units, but political parties, observers, and media should use that as a guide to ensure that no result comes out of, you know, those polling units on election day.
That's going to be very, very, very key. So now,
you're talking about how voters could identify their polling unit. So let's talk about that.
So there are 2 ways you can locate and verify your polling units. The first one is what INEC provided, which is the website. You can do that on INEC's website. And the portal, I think, is displayed on your screen, is voters.inecnigeria.org, as well as the cvr.inecnigeria.org/VVS. So
did you try to locate yours?
Yes, so I use that as an example. So when you go to that portal, you need to input the following information. First, your state of registration. So where is the state where you registered? So in my case, I registered in the FCT. It will ask you of your local government of registration, and mine is the municipal, it's AMAC. then your last name, your first name, and your date of birth. You must have this information, because if you impute wrong information, then your details will not be found. So that's the column where you need to impute those information. When you impute that, it will pop up with your information. And so I am on the voters register, and that's my details. So you see, yes, the name and then the polling unit. So that polling unit that I have is a new polling unit, because I did transfer, you know, my voter records from where I used to live to a new place. But what is interesting about this particular portal is the polling units. Some polling units have been geotagged, so you can locate the polling unit from the map, and the green spot you find there. Once you click that, it takes you to the map where you can locate your polling units using Google Map. So this is the first, you know, way to locate your polling units on the INEC portal, which is voters.inecnigeria.org.
So in all of this, because one of the excuse me, issues that also came up with the polling units happened to be overvoting. Now, there's a lot of confusion about that. People wondered, look, they never thought that that could happen this time around. But yes, there's a flip side to it. So tell us, how do we spot, avoid, or ensure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah, but before we also get to that, there's a second way you can confirm your polling unit, and actually third. The second one is to look out for when INEC will publish the list, you know, of registered voters in your polling unit. But you can also use WhatsApp to check and locate your polling unit. And there's a WhatsApp chatbot that exists where you find the information. All you need to do is to send, you know, just hello, just chat with the WhatsApp chatbot. That's the number displayed on the screen. And it's 0906 28 30860. Once you chat with this chatbot, it gives you information as well as a menu. Once you go to locate your polling unit, it takes you, you know, to the location where you can locate your polling unit. So beyond going to the website, you can also use the WhatsApp chatbot that has been provided, you know, by Yaga Africa to get all the information. And it's not just the polling units. You can also get election results on election day, and all the information that you require will be on the WhatsApp chatbot, and just to make it seamless for people. INEC said there will be a phone, there will be a number where people can text their voter identification number, and then it pops up with their details. So we are expecting additional information.
Very nice.
To pivot into overvoting, I think it's important, and I'm glad that we're talking about it this morning. What is overvoting? And you've repeatedly, even on this program, explained what overvoting is. Overvoting occurs when the total number of votes cast in a polling unit is higher than the total number of accredited voters. It means that overvoting has occurred in those polling units. Now, what are the reasons for overvoting? There are two main reasons for overvoting. One is human errors from the either presiding officers and the polling officials in the course of recording the results. Often you find those errors. So sometimes when somebody tries to, sometimes when you write 5, it could mean 8. Sometimes it could look like 3. It's the same way when you say 2, just those human errors are 1. 2, it's deliberate manipulation of the process. So sometimes compromised polling officials can alter those figures, and it can lead to overvoting. What are the implications of overvoting? It's cancellation of votes. Once there is overvoting in a polling unit, the election for that polling unit will be cancelled.
Wow.
And the consequence is it could lead to inconclusive election. And so there are 5 ways, you know, voters who are preparing to vote next week and in the governorship election can prevent overvoting. The first one is anyone who shows up at the polling unit next week should present themselves to be accredited using the BVAS. Do not allow anyone tell you to vote without accreditation. It is important that you insist to be accredited using the BVAS. Sometimes you would see communities, you would see party agents and compromised polling officials issue ballot papers without accreditation. As a voter, refuse to do what? To vote without accreditation. So that's the first one. The second one is in the course before the accreditation starts, please ensure that the BVAS has 0 records.
So they must look at it.
They must look at it. There are party agents there, but the presiding officers are required, to show that there are 0 records for accreditation figures. The third one is, as a voter, on the 25th of February for presidential and National Assembly elections, you are entitled to only 3 ballot papers. Do not let anyone issue you more than 3 ballot papers. The first one is for presidential, the second one is for Senate, and the third one is for House of Reps. And then for the second election, in 28 states, voters are entitled to 2 ballot papers. So do not receive additional ballot papers more than the ones that you are entitled to. And the fourth one...
we really have to go now.
Okay.
We really have to go. We know that.
Here's what we'll do. So if you've got questions, send them in.
Yeah.
So we will collate all of your questions, and then there'll be a lot more of the sessions that we'll bring to you as we progress. So it's not by any chance over. We're just getting started. So I have a lot more of this. So don't worry. You haven't lost much. You haven't even lost anything, because we'll do this over and over again.